Okay, we are in the middle of Simekuf Lametes discussing the halachos of Chanukah, and we're in the middle of Sif Dal. We were talking about what materials you're allowed to use, what fuel you're allowed to use for the menorah, and we ended off with the last thing we mentioned was that when it comes to an electric one, so we explained that if you will use it because you have no choice, then you're going to want to hit as many points as you can. So using a battery, using light bulbs, hopefully that can get hot. They should have light, things like that. Better than a plugged-in electric one. Those would be, I guess you could say, lower. Okay, that's what we ended off with yesterday. But it's not ideal, obviously. Okay, but let's go further. So now we're in the middle of Siv Dalid, where it says "V'lo yiyu shnayim kliyin yachad." Yeah. Okay, the second paragraph of Siv Dalid. So now like this: "V'lo yiyu shnayim kliyin yachad." Let's say you have two wicks, and these two wicks are. Oh, 1 second. We didn't. No, actually, sorry. We're a little bit before that. A little bit before that. We said that technically you should use olive oil. We mentioned that if it's the olive oil that became congealed, that's okay also because it doesn't have to be literally exactly how it was used in the Beis Hamikdash. Plus, it melts from the heat before it even is used as fuel, so it's counted as olive oil also, and that's where we got into the electricity. Fine. So we're holding actually two lines into Dalit. So it says like this: let's say a person can't find olive oil. So then you could use any type of oil that the candle that lights from it will be a nice burning, clear and good flame. Or if you can't use the oil, or you don't have any other options of good fuel, so then you could use candles made of beeswax, because they also have a very pure, good light. What does the Alter Rebbe write? So the Alter Rebbe says this. Been get to Shabbos, but over there, Shemitza Yoser Bishar Shmanim Sha'idam Zach Vitzolu Mi Benedei Shal Chayla B'Shal Shayva. The Alter Rebbe writes that it's best to use oils, other types of oils, if you don't have olive oil, better than to use oils made from chaylev, which is fats, or shaiva, which is wax. Now, some people do say that the wax nowadays is good, that they make them into better candles. I think Moshe Feinstein says it about Shabbos, that nowadays the candles are better than they used to make them. They used to kind of wrap them around and it wasn't as good, but now they're like solid good pieces, so it would be the same thing. So that would be number one, but also chaylev, the problem with chaylev is fats. Chaylev basically is a liquidy type of thing, but number one, it's not an oil. But also the problem is that you're always going to be worried about it splashing places and making things treif. Chaylev is not kosher. Shuman would be kosher fats. Chaylev is non-kosher fats. So that's another issue why it could be a problem. Now, one second. Now, another issue would be that if you do half and half, meaning now some people say you could do it with oil, but let's say you want to do you don't have a lot of candles, or you don't have a lot of oil, so you want to do half oil, half candles. So really, the place can say you shouldn't do that because it's going to look like that a few different people lit. It looks like you have different menorahs, even though they're right next to each other. You're not going to realize that it's all one person lighting it. People are going to think that it's two different people are lighting two different styles. So ideally, you shouldn't do that. Some people say you shouldn't do it at all. But it looks like, if you don't have any other option, then you could. But there is an idea to be careful to use the same type of fuel so that it should look like one menorah, not like it's a whole bunch of things spread apart. Yeah, you got a question?
Yes. You said that you should not. Love reps is not usually beeswax or not beeswax, wax or chaylev. But I thought we could use beeswax for the shamash.
Yeah, so the shamash is different. The shamash you could, and we explained yesterday why we dafka use actually a candle for the shamash. Two reasons: number one, to make it different than the rest, and number one, and number two, because it's hard to use it to light other candles when it's a liquid. You're afraid it's going to spill, so it's harder to use. So we give two reasons why we should use the candle for the shamash itself, but that's different. The shamash is not one of the real candles, so it doesn't matter what you use. Okay, now, so that was that. So now, excuse me. Now we continue to the second half of Dal. Now, you shouldn't have two wicks that are twisted together, because if you have two wicks that are twisted together, they have a kimedura. It becomes like a torch. And once it becomes like a torch, then it's not the mitzvah of a ner. The whole point is supposed to be a ner, a candle, like it was in the Beis Hamikdash, not a torch. So therefore, you shouldn't do that. Ela kol ner yechidi. Rather, what you should do is you should have every single candle should be one individual wick, and it should be a little light that comes out of that. This is also a reason, by the way, why the menorah generally is going to be in one line. right? We don't make them round. Higher and lower, it's not so pashut, but whatever, we'll leave that for now. But let's say round or stuff like that. So over there, part of the reason is that because it looks like a torch. You want it to be in a straight up line that each candle is distinct, is separate by itself. So that's another reason why, similar to this idea that you don't want to put the wicks together because the flame will become, and it looks like, so the difference would be by Abdullah. Abdullah, you dafka use a candle that the wicks are sort of all intertwined. You don't want to use an individual one. But here, you dafka want to do only an individual one. Now there's a conversation about if you have in the olden days they used to have basically it was like a bowl, right, that they would have a cover on top and they would have wicks coming out of it and they would have oil inside of it. So instead of like us, we have basically a menorah that's all different pieces. But then they would have it's one bowl with one source of fuel and you just pick out the wicks. So as long as even if it's over there, the place can discuss that what happens if it's really one wick that you pull from one side to the other. Or maybe even more than twice, whatever. But let's assume twice. You pull it through, it's the same wick underneath. It's connected inside. It's just that you covered it with a cap. So it looks like that would probably be okay, but it's not so common nowadays because we don't really have that. But you never know. Sometimes you're traveling and you're stuck in a funny situation where you don't have your normal menorah or things like that. So it's good to know that these, maybe to think about this. Maybe you could use it, maybe you can't. It's worth to ask in that case. Now, another thing also is that when you use the candles, so the interesting thing is if you go to these big stores and they have the candle section, so you'll notice that a lot of the candles are religious candles. Yeah, they have either the glass will have some sort of image on it or things like that because, and it used to be this way for sure, is that a lot of the non-kosher, non-Jewish places of worship would make candles for their, for whatever it is, but they would also use it as like a fundraiser and things like that, and they would sell it. So the halacha is you should not be buying candles from that to use for a mitzvah because it's you're doing a mitzvah. You have to do it in a nice way. You shouldn't use something that was made for an aveda, right, for avodah zarah or whatever it is, and use it for a mitzvah of menorah. You shouldn't really do that. Okay, just like we said, all fuel is technically kosher. What?
Are you allowed? Not allowed to? You should.
No, you shouldn't. If you shouldn't. I will leave it at that. I don't think you should ever. What?
The only thing you do have.
Yeah, we mentioned for Abdullah the same also. Yeah.
What's with the only thing?
I think you don't use it.
You
It's a mitzvah baba aveda. It's we don't use it. It's which is actually in what do you call it? A couple of weeks ago in the Haftarah, which is that you bring something that's not appropriate as a carbon or whatever. So we don't use it. Okay. Just like all different types of fuel was kosher to use, so too you have different types of wicks that could also be kosher. You could use any type of wick. However, the condition is it has to be, sorry, not the condition. The best way to do it is to use cotton, which is called boimvela, which is basically wool from a tree, right? You have wool that grows, that's in Yiddish. You have wool that grows from an animal, which is wool, and then you have wool that comes from a tree or from a plant, which is basically cotton. So we'll come back to this point in a second. You also don't need to have new wicks every single night. You can continue to use the old ones until they burn out. Okay, so now we'll come back to that point, but let's go to the first point that we mentioned, that that you're allowed to use technically any types of wicks. The best, as we said, is cotton. So what you shouldn't do is use, let's say, if you have a piece of wood that you want to use as like you put it inside a little twig, and that twig is going to burn for a half hour, so that you shouldn't use, obviously, to light the menorah. You want to use something that's going to actually burn fuel, because that's the whole mitzvah, is the oil. So to take a wooden stick that you could use for a fireplace and put inside and light the top, and if it's done right, it could burn for a significant amount of time. That you can't do. So the wick has to be like a wick that's going to draw the fuel from it. So based on that, you have 1 second. Oh yeah. So based on that, you do have differences of opinions. Sometimes when you look at the wicks that you buy, you buy the wicks, and a lot of times you'll notice that they have wax on top of them. So let's say the small ones that float or different types of things. The reason why they do that is because it's easier to handle, right? A regular wick would be flimsy. So they dip it into wax, and now it's like strong, like any candle that you use for Shabbos lighting, any whatever. So you'll notice the top of it has some wax on it. That's how it holds itself strong. Wait, what's it? Oh, and it lights, well, okay, maybe it lights easier also, maybe. But the problem is like this, that if we said before that the beginning of the lighting is the mitzvah, that as soon as you lit it, what did you light? Wax, not oil. so you didn't do the mitzvah in the Mahadran way, which is with oil. So some people say that you shouldn't really do that. You shouldn't use those types of candles. So what should you do? You should either break it until the wax falls off, and then once the wax falls off, so now it will burn just from the wick, or you could hold your candle there for an extra, a few seconds until the wax melts away. And once the wax melts away, then you take your candle away. And now now it's like the official sort of lighting, and that would be on the wick itself. So you have that over there as well. One second. I just want to say one thing about this. Trying to think where I had this over here. I think it was about this. There is also sometimes people want to do, where they'll have, let's say, I'm trying to think of where you can see this. It's a small little opening that's a gas or oil. There's no real wick, right? The gas, like imagine a lighter. You light a lighter and there's no wick. A lighter doesn't have a wick. It has the gas that comes out and that's what makes the flame. So technically you could have a type of candle that works the same way, that you don't have a wick. But what you see from here is that you do have to have a wick. Right now, some people say you can get away with it because it's consuming the fuel. Okay, it could be, but it's not the way to do it. Is to have that you don't have an actual wick. You're supposed to have an actual wick, which would be similar to the way it was a Beis Hamikdash. If someone didn't have it, they just had that type of candle, which is I don't know how you'd find it portable. It would have to be something like built in. They do that for safety. But in theory, if you had a little bit of something that didn't have an actual wick, it's not the best way to do it. 1 second. Okay, that would be number one. Then I just want to go to the last point that we mentioned, which was that we said about using a new one every single day or not. So we said in the Kitzur it mentions that you don't have to use a new one. You could use the same one. So let's go to the bottom, Siv Dalet, and it says like this. This is by the Minhagim. It says, Yesh noyegin lahadlik b'chol yom psilis chadashes. This is a quote from Sefer Minhagim. So they're saying from what the Rebbe said, that people have a minute that they want to use new wicks every single night. Right? Because you're starting a new mitzvah, you should do something nice. Some people say, no, you don't have to use new ones. You could use the old one, like we said inside. They would say, he says, in fact, the truth is that the old ones are maybe even better because they light quicker and easier. Exactly. Now, the Rebbe continues and says, that the Rebbe was saying, I believe it's from the Shemis maybe, that until now I haven't found or figured out what the minig of the Frierdiker Rebbe was. So therefore, it's not clear what is the way to do it. However, in Tafshin Tezayin, the Rebbe over there says that there was once that the Frierdiker Rebbe did use the old ones, specifically, right? They were usable. He used them and he didn't throw them away. And the Frierdiker Rebbe explained that there's actually a reason why he did that. And the reason is because when you're in Golos, the whole idea of Golos is to use all the things that are in this world to elevate them and to light them up. So if you have a wick that basically you could still use, even though you used it the night before, but it's still usable, then you should continue to use it to make light. So even though you don't have a clear meaning, but it looks like that there would be, that the Frierdiker Rebbe definitely did use it once, and the Rebbe other times said that he didn't really know of a clear meaning. So I don't know if that was like a Hidal L'Rabim. It was just, I guess, the story that the Rebbe said that the Frierdiker Rebbe used it. So, but either way, the point is that you could use it. I'd use mine if they're big enough and they light easy. There's no reason not to. There's no reason not to. Especially if the Frierdiker Rebbe gave a reason. It's a nice thing. 1 second. Especially if the Frierdiker Rebbe gave a reason. It seems like it's a nice reason. I think it's very appropriate. Yeah.
Just like Shabbos can have the comment like birth like the way first and usually
So we'll talk about that when we get to what's it called. But when we get to Shabbos, because it's not so simple that's our minute. But I will say that over here you don't have to do that. There's no
I'm not have to read loud. Since not
to light it before.
Yeah.
People do it. People do it. I wouldn't. There's no reason not to. In fact, what happens is a lot of times you're using brand new wicks, and like Ovadia mentioned before, that a lot of times you want the wax there because it helps catch fire quicker. But when you're using oil ones, and especially if they're dry, so it has to first suck up the oil, until it's able to use the fuel to light. So sometimes you'll light it and it doesn't stay lit. So over here, there might be a reason to first light it. It draws up the fuel, and then you put it out. So I don't see for sure there's no problem with it. It's kind of what we're discussing here. Using an old one is easier. So I don't see an issue with it. Usually people don't have time for it. So, when you're just setting up your menorah, you're coming home from mincha and you want to set up your menorah, is it appropriate to then light each one and put them out? So I don't know. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Ivaika. So now we're in Sif Hey. So Sif Hey, the Kitzur says like this, Now, so now we're moving on to the actual menorah. Okay, so the actual menorah itself. Imadlik b'ner shalcheres. If someone uses an earthenware menorah, which means that it's made like a mug style, but it wasn't actually, yeah, like pottery style, exactly. So kivin shehidlik b'layla achan. Once you use it for one night, nase yashan, it becomes old. What does it mean old? This doesn't mean old in age. It means used. The ain't madlikin boy balayla sheni, and you shouldn't use it again. What do you mean? I use my menorah every night. Why? Okay, so I use my menorah every single night. I don't get a new menorah every night. I mean, it would be nice. Silver menorahs are expensive, but obviously I don't get a new one every night. So why is kli cheres different? So over here he explains because because once you use earthenware once, it becomes disgusting. It gets black, it gets stained, it absorbs the oil. You can never clean it. You ever take certain types of pottery, yeah, if they're not glazed at the outside, and they use it for, I don't know, a drink or something, it absorbs, it never gets it out again. So therefore, this thing, you use it for a fire, it draws in the oil, it becomes sooty, like full of the black stuff. That's it, it's over. So therefore, the halacha is that we want to use a menorah that's beautiful. Specifically, there's different grades. The best one would be one made from metal. And in the metal category, if possible, you should use a silver one. That would be even the best. The Hidr mitzvah to do it in the best possible way. Now, there's all different types of menorahs that are mentioned. I think there's 15 levels of menorahs. And the first one that's mentioned is obviously gold, which is not so attainable due to the price. But silver is the one that's, I guess you could say popular, one of the top ones. There is also glass, I think, is part of it. So glass, I think you could still use. But glass is not earthenware. But based on what we're saying over here, it seems like that if you use your glass ones, so your let's say you use the stuff, the cups. So some people would say that glass, even though it was used and it gets a little black, it's not a problem because it's not the menorah. It's just the keli that you put the oil into, and everyone knows it gets dirty. That's fine. Other people would say, no, the truth is, if it gets really dirty, you should try to clean it out at least a little bit. It's not earthenware, it doesn't become disgusting, but you should clean it out before you use it the next day. So you do have, I guess you could say, different opinions of exactly how that you should do. Now, what would be if, let's say you don't have any menorah? So Bachram and Yeshiva, very often, especially this year, people probably won't have their own menorah. They're just going to take the cap and they're going to put it inside of a little thing, and they're going to line it up next to each other. So that's fine. That's what people generally do. It's not a problem. I mean, it's not the best. You don't do it if you're at home. You try to get something to hold it into. But if you're in a situation where you don't have it, you could line them up nicely. And that seems to be something that's accepted in the case of like yeshiva, things or stuff like that. Okay, so that's the thing.
About like